Welcome to another deep dive, everyone. Today we're tackling something that might sound a little dry at first, but trust me, it's a total game changer when it comes to writing.
Yeah, it's one of those things that can really make you a stronger writer once you unlock its secrets.
We're talking about the passive voice.
Exactly.
Now, before we get too deep, maybe we should start with the basics for anyone who might not be totally familiar.
Sounds good.
So, what exactly is the passive voice, and what makes it different from the active voice, which is what we use most of the time?
Well, think about a sentence like, the dog chased the ball.
Okay, classic dog and ball scenario.
Right. So in that sentence, the dog is the subject. It's the one performing the action.
Makes sense.
But if we flip it to the passive voice, it becomes the ball was chased by the dog.
Okay, so the ball's taking center stage now.
Exactly. The focus shifts from the doer of the action to the receiver of the action.
And I remember in our research, someone used the example of a dog bit me versus I was bitten by a dog.
Perfect example.
It's the same event, but it feels so different depending on which voice you use.
Right, because in the first one, a dog bit me. It's all about the dog.
Oh, no, a scary dog.
But in the second one, I was bitten by a dog. The focus shifts to you and what happened to you.
Yeah, like the emphasis is on my experience.
Exactly. And that's one of the key things to remember about the passive voice.
It's not just about changing the word order. It's about shifting the emphasis and sometimes even the tone of the sentence.
Absolutely. And it can be a really powerful tool for writers who want to control how their message comes across.
Speaking of powerful tools,
Mm-hmm.
I remember another example from our research that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
It was the sentence, "The Mona Lisa was painted by Leonardo da Vinci."
Ah, yes. A classic example of the passive voice in action.
It puts the spotlight on the artwork itself.
Exactly. Not on the artist who created it.
It's like the painting becomes the star of the show, which makes sense considering its fame.
Right. And that's just one way the passive voice can be effective.
So we've talked about what the passive voice is and how it changes the focus of a sentence. But how do you actually construct a sentence in the passive voice?
Well, there's a bit of a formula to it.
Ooh, a grammar formula. I love it.
It involves the verb to be and the past participle of the main verb.
Okay, remind me what a past participle is again.
So the past participle is the form of a verb that we typically use with have or had.
Okay, so like walked, talked, jumped.
Exactly. Those are all past participles.
Got it.
So in the passive voice, you take the verb to be and combine it with the past participle.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. How about the cake was baked by my grandmother?
Okay, so was baked, that's the passive voice construction.
Exactly. Was is a form of to be, and baked is the past participle of bake.
And what's interesting is that the form of to be can change depending on the tense.
Right. You can have was baked, is being baked, will be baked, and so on.
But the past participle baked stays the same.
Exactly. It's like the anchor of the passive voice construction.
So it's kind of like a grammar puzzle.
Mhm.
You have to find the right form of to be to fit the tense.
And once you get the hang of it, it's not so hard.
Okay, so we're starting to crack the code of the passive voice. But why bother?
What do you mean?
Like, why not just stick with the active voice all the time? It seems simpler.
Well, there are actually some very good reasons to use the passive voice.
Okay, I'm all ears, spill the tea.
Well, first of all, as we've already seen, it can help you shift the emphasis of a sentence.
Right, like highlighting the action or the object rather than the person doing the action.
Exactly. Sometimes that's exactly what you want to do.
Okay, so emphasis. That's reason number one.
What else can you think of?
Well, based on our research, I remember that sometimes the doer of the action is unknown or unimportant.
That's another key reason to use the passive voice.
Like if you say, the window is broken, you're focusing on the fact that the window is broken, not on who broke it.
Precisely. Maybe you don't know who broke it, or maybe it doesn't really matter for the purpose of your sentence.
So that's reason number two. The doer is unknown or unimportant.
What about reason number 3?
Ooh, I remember this one too. It's about creating a more formal or impersonal tone,
You're on a roll.
like in a scientific paper or a legal document.
Right. In those contexts, you often want to sound objective and avoid personal opinions.
So passive voice can help you achieve that.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got 3 good reasons to use the passive voice: emphasis, unknown doer, and formal tone.
Those are some of the key ones.
But are there ever times when it's not the best choice?
That's a great question, and one we should definitely explore.
Let's dive into that next time.
You know, sometimes the passive voice gets a bad rap.
Like it's this evil villain of grammar.
Right, people are always saying avoid the passive voice, but like we talked about last time, it definitely has its uses.
It's all about using the right tool for the job.
Exactly.
So how about we play a little game?
Okay, I'm game.
I'll give you a sentence in the passive voice, and you tell me if it works or if there's a better way to say it.
Sounds fun. Let's do it.
Okay, first one. The meeting was adjourned by the chairperson.
That one feels a bit stiff and formal.
Yeah, I think the chairperson adjourned the meeting sounds much more natural.
It's more direct and to the point.
Okay, next one. The report was written by a team of experts.
That one could go either way.
How so?
Well, if you want to emphasize the report itself, then the passive voice works fine.
But if you want to highlight the expertise of the team...
Then you might say a team of experts wrote the report.
Okay, that makes sense. Here's another one. It was decided that the project would be delayed.
Ooh, that one's a classic example of how the passive voice can be used to avoid responsibility.
Like who decided? It's
Yeah.
a mystery.
Right, it's hiding the decision maker.
A better way to say it might be, the project manager decided to delay the project.
Or the team agreed to postpone the project.
Much clearer and more accountable. Okay, last one. Mistakes were made.
Oh boy, that one's famous.
It's the ultimate passive voice dodge.
Nobody wants to own up to those mistakes.
Exactly. It's like they magically appeared out of thin air.
So how could we rewrite that one to be more transparent?
Well, it depends on the context. But you could say something like, I made a mistake, or we made some errors in judgment.
Much better.
So I think the key takeaway here is that the passive voice isn't inherently bad.
It just needs to be used thoughtfully.
Like any rhetorical device, it can be effective or it can be clunky and misleading.
And the more you understand about how it works, the better equipped you'll be to use it effectively in your own writing.
So we've talked a lot about the practical side of the passive voice.
The hows and whys of using it.
But I'm also curious about the bigger picture.
What do you mean?
Like, how does the passive voice reflect our thinking and our communication patterns as a society?
That's a fascinating question and one that we should definitely delve into.
Okay, so we've talked about how to use the passive voice and when to avoid it.
But like you said, there's a whole other layer to this, isn't there?
Exactly. It's not just about grammar rules. It's about how we use language to shape perceptions and convey meaning.
It's about power, really.
Ooh, tell me more about that.
Well, think about how the passive voice can be used to downplay or even erase the role of certain actors or agents.
Like in that classic example, mistakes were made.
Exactly. It acknowledges that something went wrong, but it doesn't say who's responsible.
It's like a way of deflecting blame or avoiding accountability.
And that's why it's so important to be aware of these subtle mechanics of language.
Because they can have a real impact on how we understand events and issues.
Absolutely. And it's not just about politics or big institutions.
It happens in everyday life, too.
All the time.
Like, think about how people use the passive voice to talk about relationship problems.
Oh, yeah, like things were said or feelings were hurt.
It's a way of avoiding direct confrontation or taking ownership of your actions.
And it can really hinder communication and problem solving.
So what's the antidote to all this passive voice manipulation?
Well, I think awareness is the first step.
Just being conscious of how the passive voice is being used.
And then being willing to ask those critical questions.
Like, who's doing the action? Who's benefiting from this framing of events?
Exactly. It's about reading between the lines and unpacking the hidden meanings behind the words.
It's like being a language detective.
I love that analogy.
So I think we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we?
From the nitty-gritty grammar rules to the broader implications of the passive voice.
And I hope our listeners have come away with a new appreciation for the power of language.
Me too. It's amazing how much thought and intention goes into every word we choose.
And how even something as seemingly simple as the passive voice can have such a profound impact on our communication.
It's definitely something to keep in mind as you write and as you navigate the world around you.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Thanks for having me on the show. It's been a great conversation.
And thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into the passive voice. Until next time, happy writing and happy thinking.